Right, we're into it again. So we're going to go from using the color block, which is this, and then we're going to go apply it to a shape which will end up something like this. And here you can see a little bit of construction with the sun, looking at how that works to create kind of a more accurate shadow, so we'll go into that as well. So this is 2-point perspective, so if you need to still that you're using this quite consistently, then we're going to have these 2 points down to be aiming at. The closer you have these points together, the more distorted the image will look. The further apart, the kind of more natural. Obviously what happens between these points, if you don't already know, that the kind of line between them here becomes your eye level line. So essentially something that you look at that's right at your face height would be here. Okay, something that's floating above you would be above it, and something that you're looking down upon would be there. So an example, this would be like a chair. You look down at it because you're taller than it when stood up. Okay, something you would see here would actually be something like the size of a house. So obviously you look down at the lower part of the house, but you can't see on top of the roof, short of being up on a ladder. So that way you can't see the top. So it goes right through this mid-plane. So you'd be seeing kind of 3/4 door height would be about here, and then up here you're getting kind of like top of the roof type thing, and then this would be looking at a light hanging on a ceiling if you're inside or something like that. Okay, so now that we've got the view on how to use it to a certain extent, those who are used to 1-point perspective, as things go into the distance with 1 point, you find that it tends to do the whole road thing. Looks like a road going into the distance there. So that's that, but we've got now we've got 2 of them, and it kind of seems a bit weird on how would we apply that. So to translate that across, easiest way to think about that is if we have someone who is this tall here, my little big man, okay, he stood right down here at the bottom of the page. If we take that and project all of our horizontal lines go towards the vanishing points, okay, try and be as accurate as you can. Again, if you're not 100%, it's not the end of the world. So if we take this same person and we shrink him into the distance, okay, what we'll find is that he will start to get smaller and smaller, because essentially he's getting further and further away. So when you see someone stood in the distance and you can put them between your fingers when you're looking at them, it's because they're far away. As you get closer, your fingers get wider, and then you stood in front of them, and I've never met anyone who still fits like this between my fingers. So that is the principle there in terms of how the 2-point perspective works. So we use that to help construct 3D shapes to kind of give it a kind of a more realistic aesthetic. So if we go from there, and I'll set up some new perspective points, we're going to work with a cube. Okay, so as we project this across, oh, that one's a bit wayward. Okay, to keep a cube accurate, if you take 2/3 of the height and then translate that into length, that will make it appear like a cube. Okay, because that looks as tall as it is long. Now if I measure that and use exactly that same length, what you'll find is that looks longer than it is tall, even though I've taken that exact distance. So as I explained, as things get further into distance, they shrink, and so this is why, to keep things looking proportionate as tall as they are wide, they shrink and they lose kind of like a quarter. So that there is kind of as unhelpful as it may seem. When you are sketching objects, everything that we see in real life is in 2-point perspective. Okay, we see everything in perspective. So when we're trying to put these cubes together, this helps us judge proportion. When we look at things like a car, it will probably be about 4 cubes long by kind of 1 cube high at the front, and then for the top part of the car will be kind of 2 cubes high for maybe 2 cubes or 2.5 cubes in terms of proportion. Now we don't draw everything out in cubes, but what happens is if we're very comfortable with doing this, it means we can skip these steps and we can judge the proportions a little bit more accurately, because even professionals, when they do their sketches, they still use some of the framework from two-point perspective to get their drawings looking accurate and tidy. So now that I've finished kind of covering the basics, what I'm going to cover now is using this two-point perspective to work at rendering as well. So if we say our sun's here, that's our sun. Okay, we know which angle it's coming forward from. So as I mentioned before, when we looked at this for your rendering, I've got 1, 2, 3 is what I use for my light, medium, dark. This is where it comes into play. So to know which surface is going to be your lightest is which one's going to be hit first. Now, there kind of seems to be a toss-up between these, but generally rule of thumb is sun is higher in the sky than it is lower. We don't tend to do rendering at kind of sunrise and sunset. So this side surface here is going to be a value of 1. Then this one obviously gets hit second, so a value of 2. Then this one gets hit third, so a value of 3. Okay, then we'll have a shadow, which will kind of be a 4, which is basically kind of a step darker. But we'll cover that when we get up to it. So now that we've got that, next thing we'll go into just rendering it. So as I started off doing the color block, was you start light, you can always go back and darken it up. Now if you keep this very light and your number 3 doesn't have to be really dark, it saves some work. So don't try and start off with your 3 and make it as dark as you possibly can, because it makes extra work for you having to push harder and tidy it up for longer. Okay. What you'll also notice is I'm shading in a particular direction. I'm not doing all this. Okay, going like this is the definition of scribble. And what you'll find is if we zoom in here, okay, these lines, you can't get rid of them with using color pencils. They're always going to be there. You can spend ages going over them really tidily. The only one you'll get rid of is probably this 3 surface when you're pushing really hard and making it very dark. But generally you can't get rid of these lines, so if you keep them all going in the same direction, it keeps it tidier. But also the spin-off from that is when we do our cube, we find that, sorry, I'll just move the camera. We find that the grain shows through. So if we do it in different directions, what it does is it emphasizes these are different surfaces. Okay, and if this was a sphere, okay, a round ball, we don't render flat because the grain that you're seeing coming through the pencil is saying that it's a flat object, yet we're trying to render it that it's a 3D object and show a light source. So it contradicts the surface. So this is why you've got to be a little bit careful when using pencils, is to help emphasize the shape of the object. When you do that, it actually makes life a lot easier and helps it more effectively communicate what the object is in terms of its shape or form. Right, so on to number 2, obviously. So going across, if you really want to cheat and make life easier for yourself, you can get a scrap bit of paper, okay, and you can put it up against an edge. What this enables you to do is do this, and then it's not going to go over. So if you wish to do that, by all means do that. And if you're using soft pastels to do rendering, where you get the kind of, you shave it off, which we'll cover later, and use cotton wool bud to rub it round, that will also come in very handy. Right, so the idea for this is to try and ensure that the 2 tones stand out from each other. Then we'll go on to number 3, and we need to make sure these all 3 stand out clearly from each other, just as it did in the rendering scale, or the shade scale. So here we've got 1, 2, 3, all kind of different, standing out quite clearly from each other. Basically what you will need to do is go back and kind of just ensure that the 3 different colours stand out from each other. But this here now, looking at it, I'd say this top surface here is really a little bit too light. It just kind of just looks a lot lighter than that top surface, than this surface here. So this now gives you the 1, 2, 3, looking at 3 different shades. If you want to do, for concepts and want to keep things a little bit simplistic and speed the process up, I leave this as a 0, then this side here is a 1, and then this is a 2, as obviously you can see it takes a wee while to get this done.